It begins in silence. A quiet hum fills the room, a film reel turning, old tape spinning, the crackle of static. A single sheet of paper lies beneath a dim light. The ink is fading, but one word is still visible. Classified. The date, 1953. The document describes something vague, human behavioral modification. No details, no names. At first glance it looks harmless, academic even. But the deeper you read, the darker it becomes. Words like interrogation, chemical agents, control mechanisms. The kind of language that hides behind bureaucracy, but implies something else entirely. For decades, this file and thousands like it sat buried in locked drawers far from public eyes. Every time journalists asked, they were told the same thing. It never existed. But it did. In the middle of the Cold War, while nations built bombs and satellites, another race began. One not fought in the open, but within the boundaries of the mind. The CIA, driven by paranoia and fear, launched an operation that would test the limits of morality and science alike. Its name would become synonymous with one of the darkest chapters in American history, MK-Ultra. Its mission, to find a way to control, break, and rebuild the human mind. They tested drugs, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and psychological torture, not on enemies, but on their own citizens. Some volunteered. Most didn't even know they were part of an experiment. They were told it was for research, that it was safe. It wasn't. And the results, though hidden for decades, still echo in the shadows of science, intelligence, and power. What follows isn't conspiracy. It's history. The kind that was erased until fragments of truth forced their way to the surface. The kind that makes you question who we trust and what they might still be doing behind closed doors. This is the story of Project MK-Ultra. The experiment the government denied for decades. The year is 1953. The world is split in two, democracy versus communism, freedom versus control. The United States and the Soviet Union are locked in a silent, invisible war, not for land, not for oil, but for information. The Cold War is a game of ghosts. Intelligence agencies trade secrets like weapons, and paranoia becomes the new currency of power. But amid all the nuclear threats and political tension, something else begins to terrify the West. Reports emerge of American soldiers captured in Korea who return home different. They confess to crimes they never committed. They speak of loyalty to their captors. They recite propaganda as if it were truth. Newspapers call it brainwashing. The idea that the mind itself could be rewired, made to believe and obey. If the Soviets could do that, the CIA wanted to know how, and how to do it better. In Washington, a meeting takes place inside a nondescript office of the CIA. At its head, Allen Dulles, the newly appointed Director of Central Intelligence. Dulles is calm, methodical, a man who sees power not in armies, but in secrets. He listens as scientists, military officers, and intelligence analysts discuss one terrifying idea. What if a person's mind could be controlled like a machine? Dulles doesn't dismiss it. He leans forward and says, "If our enemies are exploring this, then we must explore it first." That sentence would change everything. Within weeks, a secret memo is drafted. A new program is approved, hidden inside the CIA's technical services staff. Its name, MK-Ultra. Its purpose, to understand and ultimately control the human mind. To lead MK-Ultra, Dulles chooses a man few people would suspect, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. A quiet chemist, vegetarian poet, the son of Jewish immigrants. He walks with a limp, caused by a birth defect, yet his mind moves like a storm. Gottlieb has already been experimenting with chemical agents, ways to weaken resistance, erase memory, and extract secrets. He's fascinated by the idea of control. Colleagues describe him as kind, soft-spoken, but detached. Behind his gentle demeanor hides a conviction that morality must bend in the face of national security. He believes the mind is a machine, and chemistry is the key to opening it. To him, the human psyche is not sacred. It's a system, one that can be disassembled, studied, and rebuilt. Gottlieb begins to recruit a small team, chemists, doctors, hypnotists, and even magicians, experts in deception. Together they will create experiments designed to erase identities, break resistance, and reprogram the human will. He calls them behavioral modification tests. The CIA calls it science. History would later call it torture. MKUltra was never just one experiment. It was 149 sub-projects, scattered across the United States and beyond. Some focused on hypnosis, others on electroshock therapy, sensory deprivation, and psychoactive drugs. Gottlieb built a web of front organizations to disguise the funding: research foundations, universities, hospitals. On paper, it looked legitimate: behavioral science, psychological resilience studies. In truth, it was all part of the same machine. Professors received grants from entities that didn't exist. Doctors were told their patients were participating in government-sponsored therapy. But behind every experiment, there was one silent directive: push the limits. The goal wasn't healing. It was control. They wanted to create agents who could resist interrogation or confess under influence. They wanted to erase memories, implant suggestions, rewrite behavior. They wanted to find out if the mind could be broken and rebuilt from scratch. In 1943, a Swiss chemist named Albert Hofmann accidentally discovered a strange chemical compound, LSD-25. It caused vivid hallucinations, disorientation, and altered perception. To the CIA, this was not just a drug, it was a potential weapon. Gottlieb believed LSD could unlock the subconscious, make people more susceptible to suggestion, or even erase their mental defenses. The agency bought every gram of LSD available in the United States, enough to dose the entire country. They began administering it to volunteers, soldiers, and sometimes their own agents. In one case, a CIA officer was given LSD without his knowledge during a retreat. He experienced extreme paranoia and delusions, and days later fell from a hotel window to his death. The CIA called it an accident. His family called it murder. His name was Frank Olson. We'll come back to him later. For now, the experiments continued, unregulated, unmonitored, and unquestioned. Gottlieb wanted results. He didn't care about casualties. His instructions to sub-project leaders were chillingly simple: test the limits of human endurance, then go beyond. By the mid-1950s, MKUltra was thriving and invisible. No oversight, no accountability. Congress didn't know it existed. The president didn't ask questions. Gottlieb operated with total autonomy, hidden behind layers of classified paperwork. Universities and hospitals were the perfect cover. At McGill University in Canada, Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron, a psychiatrist, received funding through a CIA front. He began experimenting on patients suffering from mild depression or anxiety, using massive doses of electroshock, prolonged drug-induced comas, and continuous playback of recorded messages. The idea was to wipe their minds clean. De-patterning, he called it, so he could rebuild them into healthier individuals. But instead, he destroyed their memories, their sense of self, their ability to function. Many never recovered. These were people who came seeking help. Instead, they became data points in an experiment they never consented to join. By 1955, the project had gone too far to stop. Millions of dollars spent, hundreds of lives affected, and no real success. At least not the kind that could be admitted publicly. The CIA began covering its tracks, burning documents, erasing records, and discrediting witnesses. Gottlieb's reports were vague, filled with euphemisms like behavioral adaptation and enhanced interrogation. But buried between the lines, one truth remained. They had crossed every ethical line imaginable. They had turned human consciousness into a battlefield. When the project was finally exposed, decades later, it would shake public trust in the government forever. But for now, in 1955, MKUltra was thriving, hidden, expanding, and ready to move into its most dangerous phase yet: direct human experimentation. When we talk about MKUltra, it is easy to think of it as a distant story, a hidden experiment locked away in the past. But the truth is, it wasn't a single event. It was a system, one that infected universities, hospitals, and even prisons. By the late 1950s, Sidney Gottlieb had created a network so large that even some CIA officials didn't fully understand its reach. Experiments were happening everywhere, in New York, San Francisco, Montreal, Boston, Los Angeles. At least 80 institutions were involved, and thousands of people were being tested, most without their knowledge. Some were mental health patients told they were receiving new treatments. Others were prisoners, offered reduced sentences in exchange for participating in research. But many were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. A glass of water, a drink at a bar, a patient in a clinic. None of them knew that what they were being given wasn't medicine. It was LSD, or one of dozens of new compounds with names like BZ, mescaline, psilocybin, chemicals designed to erase, distort, or reprogram the mind. Behind two-way mirrors, men in suits took notes. They weren't treating anyone, they were collecting data. His name was Frank Olson, a biochemist working at Fort Detrick, a U.S. Army Biological Warfare Center. Olson was part of the early stages of MK-Ultra, a man who knew what was being done but not necessarily why. In November 1953, he attended a retreat with several CIA colleagues at a remote cabin in Maryland. Without his knowledge, Gottlieb spiked his drink with a heavy dose of LSD. Hours later, Olson began experiencing paranoia and disorientation. He told his wife he wanted to quit his job. He said he felt he had done something terrible, something he couldn't live with. Days later, in New York City, he fell from the 13th floor of the Statler Hotel. The CIA claimed it was a suicide, but the evidence didn't add up. There were bruises on his head, cuts inconsistent with a fall. Witnesses said he looked terrified before he died. Years later, when his body was exhumed, forensic experts found signs of a blow to the skull, possibly delivered before he went out the window. Frank Olson had become a liability. He had seen too much. His family spent decades demanding answers. In 1975, after MK-Ultra was publicly exposed, President Ford issued a formal apology, and the government quietly settled with Olson's family for $750,000. But no one was ever charged, and the truth of what really happened that night remains buried under classified files. While Frank Olson's death sparked quiet panic within the CIA, Gottlieb continued expanding the project's reach, this time into the streets. In 1955, he authorized one of MK-Ultra's strangest and most disturbing operations. Its name was Operation Midnight Climax. It began in San Francisco and New York, where the CIA secretly rented several apartments. They were furnished like bachelor pads, red lights, mirrors, liquor cabinets. Prostitutes were hired by CIA operatives to lure unsuspecting men into the rooms. Once inside, the men were drugged with LSD, slipped into their drinks, while CIA agents observed from behind two-way mirrors. The goal was to study how drugs could lower inhibitions, manipulate behavior, and extract secrets. They wanted to see how far a person could be pushed, how easily trust could be broken. There was no consent, no oversight, just a handful of men playing God with the minds of strangers. After the sessions, the prostitutes were paid in cash and told to report anything unusual. The apartments remained operational for nearly a decade. What was recorded there, and how much was destroyed, remains unclear. But fragments of reports describe subjects waking up hours later, confused, terrified, and permanently changed. Gottlieb called it field testing. Others called it state-sponsored psychological assault. For many victims, there was no newspaper headline, no investigation, just silence. Across North America, mental hospitals became laboratories. At McGill University, Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron continued his psychic driving experiments. Patients were sedated for weeks at a time, bombarded with audio loops repeating phrases thousands of times. "You are safe, you will forget, you will be better." Many emerged unable to speak, walk, or remember their own families. They were broken, erased. The CIA saw Cameron's work as proof that the mind could be wiped clean. They dreamed of rebuilding it, creating perfect agents, soldiers, or assassins whose memories could be rewritten at will. But the human brain doesn't reset like a machine. It shatters. Decades later, survivors described their experiences as being buried alive inside their own heads. Some were compensated years later through lawsuits, but most lived and died in anonymity. What is perhaps most chilling is that many of these patients weren't even American citizens. They were Canadians. The CIA had crossed borders in the name of research, and no one stopped them. By the early 1960s, MK-Ultra had grown into a self-contained empire, but the results were disappointing. Despite hundreds of tests, no reliable method of mind control had been found. LSD caused chaos, not obedience. Hypnosis was inconsistent. Gottlieb began to realize the truth. The mind could not be owned. It could only be broken. But stopping wasn't an option. The deeper the agency went, the more it had to hide. Files were mislabeled, documents destroyed, and funding rerouted under new names: MK Search, MK Often, MK Naomi. The experiments slowed, but never truly stopped. Decades later, when the truth finally emerged, even CIA officials claimed ignorance. And Gottlieb, he retired quietly, living on a goat farm in Virginia, the man who once held the keys to the darkest secrets of the human mind. He died in 1999, taking with him the full scope of what MK-Ultra had done. But for those who lived through it, the patients, the soldiers, the test subjects, the damage was irreversible. The human mind, once fractured, never truly heals. For nearly 2 decades, MK-Ultra operated in silence, hidden beneath layers of bureaucracy, secrecy, and fear. But in 1973, something unexpected happened. The director of the CIA at the time, Richard Helms, ordered all MK-Ultra files to be destroyed. It was the perfect erasure. Tens of thousands of pages of research, reports, and correspondence were incinerated in classified furnaces. Only fragments survived: a few misplaced financial documents, memos, receipts. The truth of what had been done, the scale, the scope, the victims, was almost lost forever. But fate intervened. In 1974, a journalist named Seymour Hersh published an article in the New York Times revealing illegal CIA operations against American citizens. That story set off a chain reaction. Within months, Congress launched investigations into the CIA, FBI, and NSA. Among the topics buried deep in the files, one code name stood out: MK-Ultra. What had once been a whisper became a headline, and for the first time, the world heard that their own government had experimented on its people, using drugs, hypnosis, and psychological torture in the name of national security. The public was stunned, but the truth that surfaced was only the surface of a much deeper abyss. In 1975, the U.S. Senate formed the Church Committee, led by Senator Frank Church. Its purpose was to uncover decades of secret operations carried out by intelligence agencies and to determine just how far the government had gone in the name of security. What they found was staggering. Witnesses described illegal wiretapping, assassination attempts, and buried in the classified annexes, the MK-Ultra program. During hearings, fragments of CIA documents were presented. Names were redacted. Experiments were coded by numbers. But the patterns were unmistakable. The CIA had tested LSD on civilians. They had conducted psychological experiments without consent. They had funded foreign hospitals for mind control studies. One senator famously said, "We were shocked not only by what was done, but by how easily it was hidden." Former CIA Director Richard Helms refused to cooperate. Sidney Gottlieb, the man who led MK-Ultra, testified behind closed doors, evasive, calm, almost detached. He claimed he had simply followed orders, that the program had been scientific exploration, but behind his words there was something else. The quiet conviction that no one could truly prove what he'd done, because the evidence was ash. The revelations of MK-Ultra were unlike anything the public had seen before. News outlets ran headlines like "CIA drug experiments on civilians," "Mind control project exposed." People wanted justice. But justice in cases like this is an illusion. There were no trials, no sentences, no arrests. The government issued a formal apology, a symbolic gesture. Victims filed lawsuits, but without records. Most couldn't prove what had been done to them. The legal system demanded evidence, but evidence had been deliberately destroyed. The result was a paradox. Everyone knew MK-Ultra had happened, yet no one could fully prove how far it went. The CIA quietly rebranded its research, moving on to new frontiers: psychological warfare, surveillance, and behavioral studies under different names. The phrase MK Ultra was retired, but its legacy lingered in whispers. And for those who studied the program, one question remained. If this was what they admitted to, what else never came to light? Decades later, MK Ultra became more than a scandal. It became a symbol of distrust, secrecy, and the thin line between science and horror. It changed how Americans saw their government. It seeded an era of paranoia and conspiracy. In every theory about manipulation, brainwashing, and control, the ghost of MK Ultra lingers. Hollywood turned it into myth. Writers turned it into metaphor. But beneath the exaggerations, there's something hauntingly real. Because MK Ultra wasn't a fantasy, it was documented, funded, and executed by real people with real victims. And it revealed something deeply uncomfortable about human nature, that when given power without oversight, even intelligent, well-meaning people can become monsters in lab coats. Sidney Gottlieb once said that he believed he was serving his country. Perhaps he was. But at what cost? The line between patriotism and cruelty blurred, leaving behind an ethical scar that still hasn't healed. In the end, MK Ultra isn't just a story about the past. It's a mirror, a reminder that knowledge without conscience can turn science into something unrecognizable. Most of its files are gone. The buildings have been repurposed. The people are dead. But the questions remain. How far will a government go in the name of protection? And when secrecy becomes a habit, who protects us from the protectors? Because history, when buried, doesn't disappear. It waits. It waits for someone curious enough to dig it up again. If you've watched this far, you've already seen what most were never meant to know. History hides in plain sight. Subscribe, stay curious, because there's always more to fathom.